Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, dear students. Today we are going to revise the poem The Huntsman. The Huntsman is written by Edward Lowbury. Edward Lowbury was born in London on 6 December 1913. His secondary education was as a foundation scholar at St. Paul's School, London, where he began to specialize in science. He was also twice winner of the school's Milton Prize, having won a science scholarship to University College Oxford. He continued to take an interest in writing, gaining the 1934 Newdigate Prize and the 1937 Matthew Arnold Memorial Essay Prize. His initial medical training was at the Royal London Hospital. He was called up to Royal Army Medical Corps in 1943, where he specialized in pathology and was posted to Kenya. There he was one of the editors of the wartime magazine Equator. In 1954, Lowbury married Alison Young, daughter of the poet Andrew Young. He had three daughters. In 1974, he was made a Fellow of Royal Society of Literature. Our present poem, The Huntsman, it is also written by Edward Lowbury. First of all, we will see the main summary of this poem. This poem is based on a Kenyan folklore which explains the dangers of talkativeness. इनकी ये कीनिया की एक लोक कहानी पर मबनी है जिसमें टॉकटिवनेस इन बातूनी होना जो है बातूनीपन जो है उसके ख़तरात से आगाह किया गया. It shows the imaginative richness and deep insight of the poet. The poem is full of suspense and supernatural elements. The poet tells us the mysterious story of an experienced hunter. His name was Kagwa. He used to hunt lions in the forest. One day, when he was wandering in the forest, he came across the skull of a dead man. Kagwa was surprised to see that skull and asked what had brought it there. The skull opened its mouth and told that talking had brought it there, but he failed to understand the real meanings of these words. Kagwa was a simple fellow and could not conceive this unusual discovery. Immediately he went to the king and told him this unbelievable incident. The king suspected the truth of his story but sent two guards with him. He instructed them, if the story proved false, the hunter must be put to death. They searched for the skull in the forest for many days and nights. At last they found the skull. The hunter asked it the same question again, but the skull remained silent. Kagwa requested the skull again and again to speak and save his life, but the skull did not answer. The king's men promptly killed the hunter there and punished him for his talkative tongue. At that moment, the skull opened its mouth and asked Kagwa how he had come there. The dead man answered, talking brought me here. The huntsman was himself hunted, and the general atmosphere of the poem is fearful. The presence of a talking skull and the killing of the hunter terrifies us. The message in the poem is that one should not be too talkative and inquisitive about everything. We should rather mind our own business. The story has been narrated in a very simple way, using short and simple words. Now we will read the poem. Kagwa hunted the lion. Though through bush and forest went his spear, one day he found the skull of a man and said to it, how did you come here? The skull opened its mouth and said, talking brought me here. In this very first stanza, the poet not only introduces the main character of the story of this poem, but also the first half of the story of this poem. Though the beginning is abrupt and it is easily comprehensible, the words used to describe Kagwa and his story are very simple and direct. This poem is based on Kenyan folklore. Students, as we have to also prepare the question of reference to the context. So first of all, I will give you the context of this poem before explaining the lines. This poem is based on a Kenyan folklore which explains the dangers of talkativeness. Kagwa the hunter sees a human skull in the forest and asks it how it has come here. The skull replies that talking has brought it here. Kagwa runs to the king and tells him about the talking skull. The king does not believe him, but he sends two guards along with Kagwa to the forest to know the real situation. He orders the guards to kill Kagwa if his story proves to be false. But when Kagwa asks the skull the same question in front of the guards, the skull does not reply. Upon this, the guards kill Kagwa. When Kagwa dies, the skull opens its mouth and asks him the same question, and the answer was also the same. Talking brought me here. Now we will explain these lines. Kagwa hunted the lion. Kagwa was a very experienced hunter. He could spot his targets through thick bushes and forest. Through bush and forest mean through thick bushes and forest. One day, while he was in the forest to hunt some lion, he saw a human skull. He was surprised to see it there. He should have ignored it, but as he was very inquisitive and talkative, he asked the skull how it had come there. The skull told him that the talking had brought it there, and there was a hidden lesson in its reply that Kagwa could not understand. Kagwa hurried home, went to the king's chair, and spoke. In the forest, I found a talking skull. The king was silent. Then he suddenly said slowly, never since I was born of my mother have I seen or heard of a skull which spoke. In this stanza, we see that Kagwa could not keep any secret to himself, nor was he wise enough to confirm any statement before conveying it to the other persons. The moment he heard the human skull talking, he ran to the king to disclose the unusual incident to him. The king was a wise man. The king was silent. He did not reply anything. Then he said slowly, never since I was born of my mother have I seen or heard of a skull which spoke. The king was a wise man, so he told Kagwa that since his birth he had not seen or heard of any skull which could speak. The king called out his guards. Two of you go with him and find the talking skull. But if his tale is a lie and the skull speaks no word, this Kagwa himself must die. अब इस थर्ड स्टैंजा में आप देखें कि किंग बीइंग वाइज व्हाट द किंग डिड. बादशाह ने क्या किया कि उसने अपने दो गार्ड्स उसके साथ भेजे. द किंग डिड नॉट बिलीव द स्ट्रेंज स्टोरी told by Kagwa. However, he called his guards and asked two of them to go to the forest along with Kagwa and try to find the talking skull. As he was sure that no such skull exists, he ordered his guards to kill Kagwa if the skull uttered no word. But if his tale is alive, if the skull did not talk, if it is not a real story, he ordered his guards to kill Kagwa. They rode in the forest. Now we see what happens in the fourth stanza. They rode in the forest, Kagwa and the guards. For days and nights they found nothing. What they did, when they were in the forest, they searched for the talking skull. But for many days and nights they could not find such skull. At last they saw the skull. Kagwa said to it, "How did you come here?" The skull said nothing. Kagwa implored, he requested it again and again, but the skull said nothing. It means that the two guards of the king, along with Kagwa, rode into the forest. There they spent many days and nights in search of the talking skull, but they could not find it. At last, one day, they found that skull. Kagwa asked it how it had come there. The skull did not answer. Kagwa was much worried. He knew that if the skull did not speak, he would be killed. So he requested the skull again and again to speak, but the skull remained silent. Now we see in the last stanza what happens with the Kagwa. The guard said, "Kneel down." They killed him with sword and spear. Then the skull opened its mouth. "Huntsman, how did you come here?" And the dead man answered, "Talking brought me here." This last stanza, this is the concluding stanza of the poem. And here we see the end of Kagwa, his tragic death, and the message of the poem. We should not be too talkative and curious about things we have nothing to do with, nor should we convey any information to others without first confirming it. We see that when the skull did not answer Kagwa's question, the guards understood that the story told by Kagwa was not true. He had perhaps tried to befool the king. So they asked him to kneel down. When he did so, they killed him with their sword and spear. At this stage, the skull opened its mouth and asked the dead Kagwa how he had come there. The dead Kagwa replied that talking had brought him there. कि यहाँ उसको क्या वो पैगाम देते कि ये मेरा ये अंजाम किस वजह से हुआ है, बिला ज़रूरत बोलने का नतीजा है. स्टूडेंट्स, आपको इस पोइम के लॉन्ग क्वेश्चंस भी प्रिपेयर करना होंगे, तो प्लीज़ क्वेश्चंस नोट करें. क्वेश्चन नंबर 1 इज़ डिस्कस द यूज़ ऑफ एलिमेंट्स ऑफ सस्पेंस एंड आयरनी इन द पोइम. What is suspense? Suspense क्या होता है? Suspense means a feeling of excitement or anxiety when you do not know what will happen next. इससे मुराद क्या है कि जब एक ऐसा एहसास जो हमें उस वक्त पैदा होता है जब हम ये ना जानते हों कि आगे क्या होने वाला है. In this poem we see that it is also full of suspense. The real suspense starts when the king asks his guards to go with Kagwa to the forest and confirm his statement about the talking skull. The reader anxiously waits for the time when the skull is expected to speak again. He also hopes that when Kagwa's statement is confirmed, he would be given some precious reward by the king. But what happens is contrary to our expectations. Here the element of suspense changes to irony. And what is irony? Irony means a situation in which the opposite of what is expected happens. यानी कि तंज से मुराद क्या है कि एक ऐसी सूरत हाल कि जब मतवक्को हालात की बजाय उनके बरअक्स हालात यानी गैर मतवक्को हालात वक़ू पज़ीर हों. It means it is opposite to the expectations of the reader. The skull does not speak even on Kagwa's repeated request, and so Kagwa, who is supposed to win the king's favor, falls a victim to his anger and is killed. The skull does speak, but after the tragic end of Kagwa. The question number 2 है, the poet draws our attention to a tragic fact of life. कि पोइट जो है वो हमारी तवज्जो किस तरफ दिलाता है कि ज़िंदगी की एक दर्दनाक हकीकत की तरफ. द हंट्समैन बिकम्स द हंटेड. कि इस पोइम में क्या होता है इसमें कि हंट्समैन जो है, कगवा जो है वो खुद हंट हो जाता है, वो खुद शिकार हो जाता है. शिकारी जो है वो खुद शिकार हो गया. द प्रे टू अ क्रूअल रिमोर्सलेस फेट. और वो किस चीज़ का शिकार हो गया? बेरहम तकदीर के हाथों. discuss. In this poem we see that the poet throws light on the fact that destiny rules over man. However brave a man may be, he cannot change his fate. Death is a mighty leveler, it does not spare anyone. Kagwa was a brave hunter, but he lacked in perception. He could not understand that the kings and dictators do not tolerate a talking man. How can they tolerate a talking skull? He also does not know the loose and careless talk causes loss. If he had been wise, he would not have told the king about the revelation. He does not understand the point of the skull. He commits the same mistake which the skull has already committed. Kagwa is brave and powerful physically, but weak before the dictates of fate. The poet rightly draws our attention to the tragic fact of life where the huntsman becomes hunted. He falls a victim to cruel, remorseless fate. It means that man is nothing before the forces of nature. आखिरकार इसमें इसका मतलब ये है कि कुदरत की ताकत के सामने इंसान जो है उसकी कोई हैसियत नहीं, कोई औकात नहीं, और आखिरकार इंसान को अपनी हार मानना पड़ती है. दैट्स द एंड. थैंक यू फॉर वॉचिंग.